recruitment, making sure the right people are there, all of the challenges that people have with costs, with duty going up, with marketing, with getting beer onto lines, you know what I mean? Like the competition is crazy.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Beer Rep Chats With. And today I am delighted to be joined by Matt from Zapato Brewing. Matt, thanks for joining the show.
Hiya, you all right?
I'm very well, thank you. And yourself?
Good. Yes, very well, thank you. Yeah.
Good. Let's kick things off. If you can walk us through how Zapato Brewing began and from your early days as a Nomadic brewer to having your own place in Marsden.
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story, to be honest. I've been involved I've worked in sort of service and hospitality pretty much since the age of 18. And I would say kind of worked with beer, as in, I don't like to call it craft beer. I don't think it's very useful, but worked with independently brewed, small brewery, beer since about 2005. So Zapato essentially is, a culmination of working with beer for such a long time, really. It kind of came off the back. I was kind of there very early doors. I started working at a bar in Leeds, which was a beer-focused bar in 2005, and kind of worked up that, working with Belgian beers, working with American imported beers, working with British cask ales, and subsequently then British sort of craft breweries. And I worked there for 10 years. And then I left to go and basically I'd sort of built a fair good network, and I left sort of hospitality industry to go work for myself as a freelancer, and that was it's a bit nerve-wracking. For a number of times, I think I earned £175 a month for the first 3 months. It was a little bit scary.
More than me. It's more than what I'm getting.
yeah, totally. But I was lucky to be supported by my wife at that point in time, and lucky to sort of fall on my feet a little bit. Ended up doing work for all sorts of people, but primarily Indie Beer Con. I did a fair bit of work with Brewery, did a little bit of work with Northern Monk, and so kind of fell into programming and hosting events, specifically beer festivals, obviously Indie Beer Con and Hop City, as part of the founding team on Hop City, and also at the same time our own projects, Leeds Beer Week, and various other things really. Consultancy was very much about sort of helping people with their businesses, sometimes being a bit of a shoulder to cry on, sometimes offering strategy, building up events, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, it was a nice time, to be honest with you. It's quite good. Zapato came all off the back of that. It was kind of a culmination of all those experiences, really. Seeing how breweries built up over time, working with kind of classics and, well-established beer breweries, and everything kind of got thrown into the pot for Zapato, really. And when we got Zapato going, it was probably the absolute peak of UK craft beer, I suppose, which made it really, really difficult to kind of get into the market, and that's kind of what we've been dealing with since, really. Just sort of working in a market that's saturated, working in a market that's kind of there's a lot of amazing kind of big players with considerably bigger budgets and all that sort of stuff. So I would say that Zapato, as much as it's sort of 10 years old now, been difficult to get
a slow burner.
Yeah. I'm all right with that. You know what I mean? I think that allowing things to kind of build up themselves and build up through word of mouth, and people getting to know you is probably better long term. But in the short term, it's quite difficult. And at the end of the day, I've always kind of been involved in beer kind of development, has seen how things kind of kick off and stuff like that. So my general vibe with everything was, let's just try to play it kind of slowly,
Yeah.
take our time and see what's coming next, rather than just trying to do what's happened in the past. That's it's kind of exciting, but also frustrating, because essentially, you're trying to work in a market that you're trying to think what's coming next. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And trying to appeal to what's coming next, really, as much as possible, rather than, breweries. I suppose really you get a lot of similar ideas and through a lot of breweries, and I think a lot of people brew to what the market wants, which is not an unsensible thing to do.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of led to that saturation, and I don't know, a lot of similar types of beers.
Yeah, a lot of hazy IPAs, a lot of people.
Oh my gosh,
A lot of people doing lagers, a lot of people doing alcohol-free beers now as well. Trying to jump on that bandwagon.
Yeah.
Was you doing home brewing and stuff before you started Zapato?
No, not really. I was very privileged to do a lot of brewing when I was working in hospitality. So when I was working at the bar in Leeds, North Bar, was kind of when that collaboration thing really started kicking off, as a real kind of going concern for breweries in the UK, and essentially aping what was already happening in America. And so we would take staff trips out to breweries, go into these places where the brewery was just in a cellar underneath the pub, and we'd do staff trips, and go and have a look at a brewery, maybe brew a beer that was special for us, go and drink in a pub, have a nice time. So I got to work with tons and tons and tons of people through that. We brewed all sorts of beers. We worked with all the best breweries. We brewed stuff at Colonel, we brewed stuff at Marble, we brewed stuff all over the place. I think we did one year where North was, I think, 18. So we did like 18 beers, from stuff that we did with Cantillon, of all people, and all sorts of things, So when I kind of, it was one of the reasons why I got into production, really, was that, I'd already worked with a lot of these breweries. I'd seen what was going on, and it's also kind of one of the reasons we don't do lots of collabs right now, because I feel, we've done a lot of them already.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite as Zapato, you know what I mean? But I did a lot of that, you know what I mean? And so, again, I think with collaboration, you're looking to get something that's greater than the sum of its part. And I would question, some collaborations these days in that, are they doing it for the marketing, or are they doing it because they're creating something, that's greater than the sum of its parts, Again, I think it's great. I think it's lovely when people are coming together and doing stuff together, you know what I mean? But sometimes you sort of see collaborations and you kind of a bit like, what's this bringing to the party? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to quite a few breweries and brewers as well, and I think that the thing that they take away from most of the collaborations is learning new techniques.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
from others, because obviously all different brewers brew a different way, different techniques, different equipment as well, and it's interesting for them to get together and learn a bit. Obviously, not if they're collaborations that they've done year after year after year. I mean, this is like one-off collaborations that you get to see different side of things, and that over the 10 years since you've refurbished a Victorian mill for your tap room, and what was the vision behind creating that space and for your community?
So the vision was to have a brewery, and not have a tap room or hospitality, because I'd done so long in hospitality that this was my kind of out. You know what I mean? So we were next door to a coffee roastery, Dartwood's Coffee. And one of the guys from there, Damien, who's one of the directors, I knew him from selling his coffee in the past, and we moved out here about 10 years ago, and Damien was like, you should come and have a look, there's a unit down here. And so we came down to Home Mills, which is sort of halfway between where I live in Slathwaite to Marsden, and we're sort of situated on a canal, but it's an old sort of light industrial kind of estate, really, but it's right by the river and it's kind of in the woods.
Yeah.
And the landlord, when we spoke to him, was really interested in sort of developing this with some more sort of forward-thinking producing companies, bringing the whole site a little bit more customer-facing. And so started here. I sort of tatted around, rattling around in this big unit after we'd taken it on for a while, wondering what I would do with it. Planned to put brewery in. I was, days away from sort of landing on a kit. It was actually the kit that used to belong to Verdant. It's now ended up, I think, at Sure Shot. in Manchester, but probably to the great frustration of Verdant, I had to pull out sort of 3 or 4 months into the pandemic because I don't know whether we really knew whether there was going to be a market to sell beer into after that.
Yeah, exactly.
Those early days. So we put that on ice, and I think the most, I suppose, towards the end of the pandemic, really just tilted towards hospitality because that's what I know how to do. And we've just now acquired a second unit, so we'll have another pass at the brewery again, I think, this year, and start getting back into production and flip the company back round the way it should be.
Do what you was planning to do before the pandemic, kind of thing.
Yeah. I've still got things on my list.
So all the beers that you brew at the moment are brewed in other breweries?
Yeah, we brew in Leeds. So we work a place called Springwell. It's a sort of big professional brewery in Leeds. We've bounced around all sorts of places over the years. So we brewed with many of the people, who inspired me in the first place, I suppose. Spent a decent year and a bit working at Northern Monk. We've worked with loads of different people now. So I think, I don't know, people are funny about brewing elsewhere and not making your own.
Yeah.
But, to my mind, it's much more difficult to sort of get someone else to brew quality beer at the same time after time after time when it's not their beer.
Yes. So how does the process work? Do you obviously create recipes yourself, or?
Yeah, in the early days, I was just physically brewing everything on site. But as we've grown and as my job's sort of changed, it's about getting settled recipes. It's about quality control. Making sure we have good relationships with our suppliers. And not a lot's changed in the beers that we brew. We kind of have a fairly settled range. And there's an amount of invention, there's an amount of familiarity. We do a number of beers that satisfy certain markets. I mean, when I first started the brewery, the rule was we'd never brew anything under 6.5%. And as soon as that strategy was exposed to the daylight, I stopped, figured that it wasn't really a good way to be. And if you've got hospitality, you need steady away drinks. And the strong beer market is not that big.
No, I think most people are brewing like IPAs at 6.5%. I think that's kind of like the standard. Dippers are starting to slow down a bit. I think they're kind of like a one-off special that you might see a couple of from breweries each year, unless obviously the breweries that are brewing them on a regular. But I think there used to be a big, massive boom for like double IPAs at one point. Yeah. And they were just everywhere. And now it's kind of slowed down a bit. So,
well, I suppose what I saw, and it kind of hit the high watermark during the pandemic, breweries got really, really excited. And again, it's that sort of American influence, as well as, I suppose, Belgium. You know what I mean? Belgium makes a ton of strong beers, And so, for me, like, if you're making strong beer, it gives you a lot of places to kind of hide.
Yeah, for me, they still need to be brewed properly. I mean, I've tasted quite a few.
No two ways about it.
ABV beers, 8% wise, and you can really taste the alcohol in them. And for me, that just kills any sort of hop flavour or aroma that's inside there.
They've got to be balanced, just like anything else. But I think a lot of people just were like, oh yeah, let's make double IPAs. That's great. Let's just throw hops at stuff. You know what I mean? And imperial stouts and all that sort of stuff. And then you had things like Untapped, which literally rewards that sort of brewing. You know what I mean? Like if you want to get good ratings on Untapped, then make smoothies and imperial stouts and double IPAs. You know what I mean? That's how to get your thing up. And a lot of breweries followed that route, and some of them have done really well out of it, and some of them not so much. But certainly, I think double IPAs dropped off. Back end of that pandemic era, really, when people were at home drinking really strong beer and falling asleep on the sofa and waking up, feeling terrible, right? You know what I mean? And actually, at the end of the day, you can't, especially in the UK, you can't get away from session drinking, right? That is British beer culture. In a nutshell, is that we're gonna, we want to have several pints of, comparatively weak beer.
Give me a lovely, juicy table pale any day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And if you're out socializing, you can't really be stood around drinking double IPAs and imperial stouts because you're going to be on the
Especially
floor, right?
yeah, definitely. What do you think? It's a quick question about what do you think that the advantages and disadvantages are of brewing your beers in other breweries compared to if you had your own?
We get access to good quality equipment, professional trained brewers. If we bugger up a batch at our side, then it's got to go down the drain.
Yeah,
If there's any problems with the beer the other way, we've got a little bit of comeback on it. You know what I mean? We've got a relationship. That helps. I think, the costs and the physical aspects of it. I've saved myself £350,000 by not installing a brewery.
yeah,
That's really great. And also, if, looking at the price of kit now in comparison, we're looking at a 80% decline on brew kit costs right now, as opposed to sort of 7 or 8 years ago. So I won't be spending £350,000 on a brew kit this time around.
It'd be a lot cheaper, that's for sure.
It'll be a damn sight cheaper, yeah. So a little bit more dynamic, a little bit quicker. You know what I mean? But there's an authenticity aspect to it, and people, some people don't trust that, right? You know what I mean? They want to, they want to see the nuts and bolts. So, there's that aspect of it as well. Some people don't quite take it seriously, despite the fact that, you're speccing recipes, you're tweaking recipes, you're doing everything that I would do normally. As I say, I used to do a lot of physical brewing. I don't do as much physical brewing anymore. And whilst I like it, I wouldn't want to be doing it week in, week out. You know what I mean? So, when we've got a brewery, we will employ a brewer, and the process will be the same as the process that I have now with working with brewers elsewhere.
Yeah. What do you think would be the biggest, the toughest challenge you think you'll face when you do open up your own site in your own brewery?
Good question. We're trying to create something a little bit more than what we've got at the moment. I think adding production just literally adds challenges left, right, and centre.
Yeah.
Again, recruitment, making sure the right people are there. All of the challenges that people have with costs, with duty going up, with marketing, with getting beer onto lines. You know what I mean? Like, the competition is crazy at the moment, and there's a concerted effort by the bigger breweries. Your Heineken-owned London beaver-themed breweries, or kind of your Guinness, all the things that are currently causing challenges that, they can send a rep into a venue where we sell beer, and they can wave a wad of cash in front of the owner who's not selling enough beer to pay his bills. He's going to take it. You know what I mean? I can't.
Of course, just
10 grand
tie up all them lines.
Yeah. So it's the same as anything else, and it's the same challenges that we've got now. We're fighting against vastly equipped other breweries. We're fighting against Guinness, right? You know what I mean? Guinness is huge at the moment. We're fighting against Neck Oil. We're fighting against people branded like independents who are not independents. We're fighting against customer apathy right now at the moment. You know what I mean? I think there's still a very engaged and motivated craft beer community, but I think if you compare the size of that community to what it was 10 years ago, it's shrunk.
And
I think we've got a section of community which, again, you look at your Untapped kind of stuff. You know what I mean? You got a section of the community that is really only concerned about strong imperial stouts, double IPAs, smoothies, and there's not a lot of space for the other stuff, even though the other stuff is what sells, right, and what makes money.
Yeah, of course.
So I think, I don't know, I think, talking to Jim, who's my salesman, who used to work at North of me all those years ago, that there's frustration in that we spent a long time trying to educate people about what independent brewing really is about, and what small company brewing is about.
How do you see the UK indie beer market evolving in the future, and where would you put yourselves in that?
I think at the moment, what we're seeing is that people are supporting local, and actually the distribution model in the UK is broken a little bit. There was a point where distributors were really taking on lots and lots of different brands and helping breweries out. Distribution has got a lot safer. And also bigger concerns have come into distribution as well, where they're sort of working with even bigger people and, sometimes the multinational breweries to get their products in.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing is that essentially that, in the markets that we used to serve quite regularly, is that people are a little bit more, little bit more supporting their local, which you can't really complain about at all. The amount of taps has sort of reduced that's available. You know what I mean? But then quite a lot of operators, I suppose, quite a lot of operators got a bit overexcited about putting in 20 taps, which is crazy.
Sometimes there's too much, isn't it? Having too many options is a bit daunting to anyone when they're standing there. They don't want to stand there for 10 minutes looking at how many beers or what beers you've got on. They just want something, a simple eight taps line up, done. I'll choose from that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I go in anywhere and I see, if you see more than 8 or 10 taps, you know what I mean? You're just like, oh my God, that's such an investment, because every single tap has to have one keg on that's sitting there. So that's what, 100 odd quid, something like that. And then they have to have one come on after that. So that's another 100 quid. And then if they, for every single line, there's a cost. And I think that's why quite a lot of those sort of craft beer bars and bottle shops have struggled, because, they're trying to offer a cornucopia of everything, you know what I mean? Rather than kind of going, okay, well, this works and this is for that sort of person, this is for that sort of person.
Yeah. And all that happens is you just have slow moving lines and they're just sitting there, just, doing, not selling, not moving, and you're struggling to get rid of, say, for instance, I don't know, a more unique style of beer. I won't mention what styles because everyone's different, but you just have a couple of beers that are different styles, not your usual session pales, for instance, and they take ages to sell. I've known this through my time in the hospitality industry that if you've got too much option, then customers will still choose what they want. They'll still go for a session pale and all the other things that you put on to try and convince people, oh, you got to try this, you must try this, it's a beautiful beer. It tends to slow, it doesn't sell. And that's always the issue.
Yeah, exactly. And there's just money locked up in the cellar, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. There's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds. Like I went into a pub just before Christmas and my gosh, they had maybe 9 cask lines. They had 20 lines on a board of craft beer. And then they had maybe 4 fonts, each with 4 different beers on as well, ranging from like Kronenberg 1664 to Guinness to whatever, you know what I mean? And you look at it, you've got like, wow, you've got like 20 grand locked up in the cellar, of just stock, right? You know what I mean? So again, it's that kind of understanding really. And I don't know, I think it's great to have variety, you know what I mean? But how much variety? At the end of the day, you're always going to sell 4 times much lager than you will do probably pale ale, you know what I mean? So, prioritize that and be realistic, I think.
Definitely, yeah. So what's next for Zapato in the next year or two?
Well, yeah, we're trying to expand. You know what I mean? We're trying to increase the footprint. We do a beer called Onwards, which is 4% pale ale, cheapest thing on the list, which is pretty solid. Hazy, but also crisp, a little bit of bitterness, balanced. That's the thing. So, we're looking for taps for that. We're looking to try and really sort of get as much Onwards out there as possible and then build on what we're doing with everything else. Adding a brewery. And so we've just acquired a site next door. So a little bit of change around on the site over here, which has just opened up another unit, which is a little bit more suitable for the brewery than our current warehouse. So we're moving a few little bits and bobs around and just looking to put a smaller kit in there. So that will be, we've kind of, I found it difficult to get consistent cask beer, not in terms of the quality of the beer, the quality's always been solid, but just consistent turnover of our sort of cask brands. So I think that we'll brew put a small brewery in there, brew permanent stout, permanent bitter, permanent pale ale, and 1 or 2 specials, really to sort of just deliver. We've never really been able to deliver properly on cask. We've always had 1 or 2 or 3 cask lines, and so get a bit of variety in the cask really. It'll also allow us to focus on, smaller batches and specials, so we get a little bit more turnaround, more new stuff, as much as I'm very much, of the opinion that a recognisable core range is what I want to do these days, you know what I mean? Just still have the specials and just sort of get them. At the moment, we're brewing the specials at a high volume, and actually, we could brew a little bit less of those and get the throughput a little bit more. And also just getting into production. We grow vegetables here, we grow fruit here. There's lots of things we can do with food as well as drink. So, that kind of, be quite nice. I can maybe move away from some of the company director roles and get a little bit more back into production. A little bit less operations, a little bit more kind of
hands-on.
Making stuff, which I quite like the idea of.
What sort of size kit are you looking to get?
Probably around 10 to 15 hectolitres.
Okay, so that's a reasonable amount. That's quite a big kit.
Decent size, size. But that'll do us, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And still brew the sort of volume stuff away from the site, with a good host. So yeah, I mean that's pretty exciting, really. You know what I mean? And actually, kind of, having had 10 years of difficult market and trying to build everything with our own finance to putting a brewery in and having a bit of a fresh start, really.
Yeah,
kind of up for that at the moment. 5 or 6 years has been about survival, and we're in a place where it is 2026 and it's the 4th of February. So I'm kind of like, okay, well, let's move on from survival now.
Yeah, it's good to be in a position where you can move forward, though, isn't it? As well. I mean, like you said, it's been 5-6 years where you've just literally been getting by, and now you're in a position to expand, get some brewing kit in, and start brewing some beers on site. I mean, that's obviously got to be a great position to be in, and hopefully there'll be no more pandemics in the future. We don't want that happening again. I
wouldn't mind my online sales going back to pandemic proportions. That would be all right.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, it did certainly help my business out as well, but I'm not going to wish it on anyone.
But yeah, I think at the moment, the tap room has been huge, and it keeps growing. It's a real sort of attraction to this area, and not only do we it allows us to really engage with the community. It brings people to the area and gets people to see the wonderful area that we live in. It's incredible. Yeah. There's so much walking around here, so much nature, and there's so much great hospitality as well. You know what I mean? And the area's grown massively. There's houses going up left, right, and centre around here as well. As I say, for this period of time, when I first got here, we lived on the outskirts of Leeds. We moved to Sathwaite, and the train from here to Leeds took 25 minutes. And so that was quicker than me living on the outskirts of Leeds and getting a bus into Leeds.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the rationale between moving here. And then for about 10 years, there's been work on the lines, there's been trains off, there's been, you know what I mean? So I just haven't had that kind of, that closeness to Leeds and closeness to Manchester that I thought I was going to get here.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's now opening up again. They've invested in all sorts of things transport-wise around the area. They've paved the canal towpath down there so people can get here without having to skip around puddles and trudge through mud. So the access is opening up here as well. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, and as I say, I'm obviously tremendously biased, but I don't think there's a beer garden quite like this in the country. So it's a real highlight. And yeah, adding then production onto the side of that as well, and a little bit more food should be a really, really great place to visit.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like you're in a really good area where it's improving. Like you said, houses going up and links to get to where you are improving. So. Yeah, and when you get your new site in and your brewery kit in there, it'll be another reason for people to come and visit you. See the nice shiny new kit.
Yeah, and we're looking for more hospitality as well. I think a bar, city centre somewhere, a pub of some description, and then that'll be it. Stop there.
Sounds good. So is there any? I mean, I know you spoke earlier that you've done so many collaborations. You're kind of swamped in collaborations in the earlier stage of Zapato. But is there any other collaborations that you might be excited to explore, or even any new styles of beer?
I've kind of got on the back burner, really. I mean, everyone that we've collaborated with in the past, I kind of owe them one back.
But definitely, yeah. That's the whole idea, isn't it? One collaboration at their brewery, and then they come back to you.
Totally, yeah. And
so you'll be doing it all over again.
That everyone was on a promise. So I have got maybe about 18 months of collaborations that we've done in the past that I owe that I owe everyone a return leg.
Every special is going to be a collaboration from now on.
I feel like I've probably got that tied up for when we get going, really. You know what I mean? And then we'll have a look at it again. after that. But yeah, I sort of, I mean, it would be nice to just sort of get, one of the things is we kind of brew an IPA maybe twice a year, you know what I mean? So just being able to brew an IPA like once a month would be great. Because I don't know, my feelings on IPA are that we're trying to, develop something of our own, and trying to develop a kind of a way of doing IPAs that's somewhere in between, what's popular now and what was popular in the past, you know what I mean? Just to explore that a little bit more.
But what question is, what hops would you use?
Oh, what's available? It depends. It really depends.
So many hops, different
so many
hops,
like sub styles amongst
there
IPA
is.
now.
There is. Would you use British hops?
Sorry?
Would you use British hops?
I use a lot of British hops. I've always tried to. I've always tried to sort of blend hops from different countries, and I think British hops provide, some of the best bittering you can get
for sure. They come a long way though with producing them tropical flavors now. I was speaking to Charles Farron, doing a lot of breeding programs to get to where the New World hops are from Australia, New Zealand, America, and we're getting there. I think it's going to take a bit of time, but we're definitely producing some really good, juicy tropical hop aroma flavors.
Definitely.
Stuff. Yeah,
I think at the end of the day, it's sort of not it's neither one nor the other, really.
Yeah,
I think I like using British hops for bitterness. I like using British hops, in pale ales and stuff like that. But they also work really well with American hops. I think at the end of the day with hops, you've got a palette of colours, right? And you draw them together in however way you want to brew the beer. You don't have to be one or the other.
Yeah.
I do. I really enjoy bitterness in beers, and I think beers without any bitterness can get in the bin. But again, it's that quality of bitterness, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I always think with a lot of my favourite British hops, they give a sort of fine quality to the bitterness that you maybe don't get quite as well from other areas. You know what I mean? The trend over the last 10 years has really just been to set bitterness. Just use a bittering agent or a hop oil or a extract or something like that, and just go, right, that's bitterness, done. But I've always been interested in combining hops for bitterness, using different, again, that sort of idea of throwing bitterness in at the start and aroma in at the end, and that's it. We don't put anything else in the middle of the brew. Like I don't like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think you got to use all of the different variables you can, and if that's timing of hops, if that's combining hops in bitterness, if that's whatever else, science might say that it doesn't have an effect, but I disagree.
History tells a different story.
Well, and I think that's at the end of the day, beer's a drink with probably the most amount of variables of anything that you can do, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is crazy.
It's exactly, and the combinations are infinite. So it makes sense to mess about with it. You know what I mean? And to play with it a little bit and to develop different techniques and use it to sort of build up a picture rather than just to go, okay, well, this is the received wisdom at this point in time. We're just going to do it like this and produce, saleable beer or whatever. You know what I mean? I think complexity is important. Yeah, I think that's what gets you. You know what I mean? And to find complexity in simple beers, I think is really, really important.
Yeah,
and the way you can do that is by bringing things in different ways. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree there. Definitely. Finally, for everyone listening, what do you want our listeners to understand about what kind of brewery Zapato is, and what makes you unique in the independent beer market?
Oh gosh, I think one of the things is just the way of experience we're bringing to this. You know what I mean? I think we occasionally on a bad day you could say we're a little bit jaded by the last 20 years of drinking, but there's so much more to beer than what's currently out there. You know what I mean? And I think that experience allows you to deliver the knowledge. You know what I mean? And the kind of to relate it to the customer a lot better. You know what I mean? So I think experience is one thing. I think at the end of the day, like, I don't know, I'm balance and complexity. You know what I mean? The two things, maybe don't rub together quite as well as they ought to do, but Even if you're creating something that's really, really, really strong and really, really flavored, like, does it balance? You know what I mean? Is the beer balanced?
I think balance is key.
Yeah, honestly, like I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it's this fella who's creating strong beers and barrel aged beers and all that sort of stuff. But he's still looking to achieve balance. You know what I mean? And still looking. You can achieve balance in all sorts of things. And I think that a lot of the more gimmicky beers in the market at the moment issue that. You know what I mean? For the chance of a sort of a cheap sale, right? It looks like a Snickers, wicked. Oh yeah, the can looks like a Snickers, wicked. Tastes like Snickers, wicked, great. Whatever, you know what I mean? Like, each their own, but is that beer balanced? You know what I mean? And when I taste those beers, they're overwhelmingly sweet.
They are, yeah. Some
and then it's like
pastry stouts can be either too sweet or you can't really pick up the flavour that's in there. It's either one or the other. To find someone that's doing it really balanced, like you say, is key. Yes, I can taste that flavour, but I don't want it to be too sweet. Maybe that's adding too much lactose in it. I don't know, but
totally, yeah. And for me, kind of, the balancing bittersweet, herbal notes, depth, I think then leads to something more rewarding. And then there's, depth and complexity, I think is really important. And even in a really simple beer, is there some depth in it? And is the flavor, is the finish lasting a while? You know what I mean? Am I getting more than just chucking it back? And, so I could point to some really popular beers that are just lacking in any kind of depth or balance. They're overly sweet, wordy, molly nonsense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The best beers in the world always have depth, always have balance, always have complexity, but it's still approachable, So that's what we're trying to do, always trying to deliver that kind of balance, depth, complexity.
Awesome.
Without scaring people off with words like balance, depth, and complexity that they don't understand.
Yeah. So one beer that you have out at the moment, what would you say sums up what Zapato is?
I mean, I love all of them equally, right?
Of course. So, every brewery owner would say that.
The beer that we've brewed the most of is probably Zapato Pale. And
I had that.
So
it's
that's
very nice. Very nice.
5.5%. You maybe fit it into the sort of extra special bitter category. Strong pale ale. Some people would call 5.5% an IPA, and it's not. IPA starts at 6. But essentially what you've got there is you've got something that is going to deliver, the original brew was probably based somewhere around Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, a little bit of influence from things like Landlord and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Where you've got kind of something satisfying, 5.5% category is doing all right at the moment, you know what I mean? And, you're delivering malt flavour, you're delivering hop flavour. It is a Citra Pale Ale, so we use Citra all the way through. We use Citra to bitter, which usually makes breweries or brewers upset. But it delivers the bitterness that I want, right? You know what I mean? And I think that bitterness then...
Well, it works for Oakham, so...
Well, exactly. If it works for Oakham, it works for me. But yeah, that kind of Citra earlier on, followed by Citra later on in the brew as well, and Citra in the dry hop always sort of carries the beer. And then we change the finishing hop on every batch. So then I just cycle through hops. And that, I suppose, partially influenced by people like Colonel, I suppose. Just a bit of an exploration for me personally about what that hop does, how it works with the Citra, how it works in a beer. And it produces kind of markedly different beers every time. So Zapato Pale changes, but also then you've still got this touchstone of the main beer. So despite the fact that maybe the finish changes, the top notes change, the flavors change, like you get past that a little bit and you've always got this solid 5.5% beer that is sort of bittersweet. And really always delivers, whenever, again, I'm utterly biased and I can't believe how biased I am these days when I taste my own beers. You know what I mean? Oh, fucking great. That's brilliant. Love it. But, you always come back to it whenever I get a fresh can in and whenever we've got a new batch, then I tend to end up drinking 5 or 6 in a session or whatever, you know what I mean? So I always come back to it and it always delivers, but it delivers consistency. Delivers familiarity, but then it also has a bit of a twist every time. So you've got that variety as part of it as well. And so anyone sort of stocking that, is, regularly is always going to get, Zapato Pale pretty much the same every time, but you've got a little bit of variety in there as well. And I think that's, I don't know, it kind of sums up where everything is at the moment. You know what I mean? You want a little bit of invention, a little bit of difference, but really you want to be able to, you want that touchstone. You want that element of familiarity. And I think it always does that, you know what I mean? And especially because it's very Citra based as well. You've got that familiar citric aspect. You've got that lychee thing, which I think is always underrated in Citra, that kind of jelly kind of sort of sweetness that you get from lychee.
It's amazing how popular Citra hop is, considering it's not been around that long.
Yeah. Oh, it's incredible.
And it feels like it's been around since day one. It's so popular.
Yeah. I suppose it has, really. You know what I mean? Like when we first started buying beers with American hops through Roosters, they were one of the first breweries, them and Summer Lightning. One of the first, Marble across the way, one of the first breweries to sort of really start leaning into American hops. And it was all Amarillo, Cascade, all that sort of stuff. And then Citra kind of crept in, and then suddenly you're like, oh wow, this is the hop that delivers that flavor, right? That delivers that craft beer flavor, and it still works like a treat. Absolutely reliable, year in, year out. The profile's pretty similar. Obviously, if you're Hill Farmstead and you're buying Citra from specific lots on specific farms or whatever, and being terroir based, then you can probably point to a lot of differences in Citra. But essentially, it's reliable year after year, and it delivers that flavour and that balance. Yeah. So yeah, it's a Zapato Pale. That's the one.
Yeah.
Represents us the most. Yeah.
I've encouraged everyone to try Zapato Pale. It's a beautiful beer. Very nicely balanced, easy drinking. What more could you ask for? It's an amazing beer.
Exactly.
On that note, thanks for joining the show, and it's been amazing chatting to you and learning more about Zapato, and really excited about everything that you've got going on in the future.
Thanks,
with the new kit, and I really hope it really kicks off and does well, and everyone starts pouring into the tap room and to have a look at the new kit and taste your beers that you've got on. And definitely want to try one of the casks that you do as well. Definitely, 100%.
Great, man.
Yeah, it's been lovely chatting. And to everyone listening, we'll see you back in a couple of weeks for our next guest. Who could it be? I don't know. We'll find out. Once again, cheers, Matt. Thanks for being on the show. Catch you later.
Thanks very much, man. Take it easy.
You too. Cheers.